So yeah, welcome. I'm so glad I can be here and that we could make this meetup online. I hope that at least you got some beer at home and that we can drink together afterwards and do also some networking online or at least some discussion. Shortly about myself, I'm Vojta. I'm a head of data science at Mews. And when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking about how companies are dealing with growth in terms of their reporting. And us as a company who also grew quite fast, we had some challenges, and I wanted to know about how other companies of similar growth pace dealt with this. But I couldn't really find any of these scenarios or real life cases or stories of these companies. So I thought, all right, so perhaps I could start with it and create our own presentation, our own talk about this topic and how we dealt with the growth and how we adapted also our reporting around that. So what you can expect. Of course, I will start with a brief introduction into what we do at Mews and what's our product about and also what's our infrastructure. Then I have a set of problems or challenges that we had over the past 2 years and also how we solved it or what we tried at the time and with some real demos. So I'll be trying to demo also for me, it will be first demoing online. So bear with me and I hope everything will go all right. And of course, at the end, let's have some discussion. Let's talk about what do you think about the way how we solve these issues. Now let's start about Mews. We are a company and we built a solution for hospitality industry, for hotels and hostels. And the way how we do it is building several products that are either focused on the guests, so things like guest portal, where the guest can see their reservations and bookings, or a booking widget where they can create the reservation from the hotel's website. And on the side of hotels, we have property management system, which is a core solution that hotels uses to manage their reservations and their rooms. And it's the software that usually is run at the reception desk, at the front-end desk by the receptionist, or it's used by the managers to see some reports and understand what's happening with their hotel. Between that, we have payments. It's a payment solution that we provide hotels with, so they can automate a lot of their processes. They don't need any contracts with banks. They don't need to have physical terminals. Everything can be run through our payment solution. And around this all, we have open API and hundreds of integrations that we give to, or we allow hotels to enable through Marketplace. All of this is run in cloud. We originally started writing the software in .NET, and we kept it that way, and we run in Azure now. We use everything as a service. So we use Azure App Services, we use Azure SQL database. We don't have any virtual machines, we don't have any physical servers that we would need to manage. This allowed us to really focus on the development and hiring just the backend developers who knew how to write code in C# and .NET. And everything, including our SQL database schemas, is defined from code. And when we do some migrations of the, database structures, we also write everything in code in .NET and C#. So where it all started with Power BI, we started quite naively. We have two databases that we could pull data from, the operational database and some additional database as well. We had some Excel sheets, local gateway to load and schedule refreshes from local data. Of course, we started with Pro license, and all of that with 1 GB limit for the reports, which will be the first problem that we hit. All of that was quite good to begin with. We managed to automate integrating with tools like accounting software Zero or Pipedrive CRM, and we use Blender to automate this the connection. And this already was quite impressive, for example, for our investors, that they could see reporting about how our company is performing. And it was also like a good extension to our accounting software, which missed some of the features for a company that would go global like us. So too much data, right? So we are growing, and what does it mean? It means that with every month, we had more data and more data. And if we wanted to keep some yearly look at some data in our reports, it meant that with new months, we had to cut off the few more historical months. And that's not sustainable. We would end up like looking at just really a small fraction of data eventually. So what are the solutions? Of course, you could say, okay, so we are over the 1 GB capacity of reports, so we probably could purchase some Power BI Premium. But is it really worth it? When we are looking at it, I tried to keep the costs at minimum. So no, not a solution for us. You can try optimizing the reports through and look at actually the data, whether you need them or not, removing the unused columns, reducing the dimensionality of columns, and really trying to optimize it. But that's not what I'll be talking about today. I'll be talking about way how we can aggregate the data. So when you think about what we really need in the reports, we just keep the data and in a format that's actually required. Throughout the presentation, I'll be using this sample data set. You can think of it as payments transactions, for example. We have some datetime UTC, we have customer ID, someone who paid a certain value that can be in euros, for example. And we'll be looking at, let's say, daily overview of how much every customer spent. Of course, when we compare the chart with the data that we have at the transactional level, you would notice that we probably don't need that detailed data. So that's where the aggregations comes in. We'll be looking at different tools, how we can do it. We'll start with Power Query and Power BI desktop way of aggregating the data, and then we'll look at SQL and how to do that with that. And we'll hit some limitations there also with performance and how long it takes to calculate the aggregations on the server side. So we'll look at how we can solve it with Azure Data Factory. So Power Query, what is it? It's quite a nice language. I started to like it eventually. And one of the main tools that you might know it from is Excel. There, if you use Power Pivots, you can load external data source into Excel and sort of overcome also the limitations of number of rows that can be loaded into one sheet. So that's one. Second, of course, is Power BI. Not even just Power BI desktop, but we'll also look at the Power BI Dataflows, where both we can use Power Query to transform our data. Recently, with Azure Data Factory, they've introduced wrangling data flows. So now you can also use Power Query to transform and change the data in cloud. And finally, I heard, and I haven't really tried it, but you can also write SSIS packages with Power Query. So it seems like quite a universal language, which could be helpful for you to learn. I would compare it to like functional programming languages, where you define like different states that you can transform later. You don't have things like global variables there, but everything is immutable, constant, and you need to, when you like try to program and like do more complex transformations, you really need to think in the functional way where you are reducing and mapping data from one list to another. We'll be looking now at how we want to aggregate, how we can aggregate the data that the original data set. Just an overview of the whole code that we'll end up with. This is how it can look like, and now break it down to individual steps. We don't need necessarily to use Power Query. Of course, you can use Power BI Desktop and the query editor to do this by UI. But what we start doing first is to get rid of the time. We don't really need it for the way how we visualize the data in our report. So we strip the time part by casting or transforming the column to just the date type. The next step is aggregation. So grouping by. This is again something that we can do both through the UI environment of Power BI Desktop, or we can use Power Query. I personally like to have more control over what's happening with the data set, so I end up more time with the advanced editor and editing the queries, or if I first create some transformation with the UI element, I later update it or rename some of the states in more like programming kind of way. So here we'll use two columns. So we'll use group by in advanced mode to aggregate by the datetime UTC and customer ID, and we'll calculate new column value sum as a sum of value. And here we would end up finally reducing also the number of rows of our dataset. Looking at how this can be done, of course, with SQL, and if you are loading data from some relational database kind of source, you don't need to load all the transactions into the report and do the transformation there, because there you might hit some limitations in size of memory, or it can take too long eventually to process everything. So if you have more performant SQL Server, you can consider loading this aggregated data already. So just simple query where you would group by, and the transformation from datetime UTC to date is done through cast as a date, and then we would just simply aggregate it through these two columns again, and the calculated column is the sum value sum. Now, what if this takes too long on the SQL Server side or Azure SQL database? We can have like too many data there, too many rows, and doing this kind of aggregations can take a while. And there's a way how we can optimize it. We'll use Azure Data Factory for that. And here, ideally, we are working with data that are historical, that we don't need to touch any historical data when they are already aggregated. So we always need to just, for example, update the current month kind of data. And we'll continue using the SQL query that we started with, and we would just parameterize it. So we would add year and month. So the query would really focus just on a fraction of the original data set. Here it's like predefined values like 2019 and first month. But when we'll be loading and using this in Azure Data Factory, we'll put some parameters here as well. We'll later see in the demo how is this done and how it works. This SQL would end up in this box, copy activity, that does one thing. It takes data from one source and put it into another source that we would call sink. And around it, we can set up some logic that would allow us to transform multiple months. So usually what I use here is a lookup that would pull or generate list of pairs, month and year. And then for every such pair, I would execute the copy payments activity. This is just written in some like programming language kind of way. And the question is then, where are we going to store the transformed data? If you are working with your SQL database, you might think that it would be a good idea to probably put it back to the original SQL database. It's not really our case, or we couldn't do that because we are looking at operational database and we are working just with read-only replica. So we had to store it somewhere else. And since I wanted to keep originally the costs to minimum in terms of the storage as well, I've decided to use Azure Blob Storage. And when we already have all the data in Blob Storage, we can use again Power Query to load the data from that Blob Storage into our Power BI. So we would just access the Azure storage where we have some containers. So our container is called mine container. And then what it actually prepares, what this code actually prepares, is a table that contains just a list of the files that are present in the container, and we would transform this table by adding another column that would parse the content and into a CSV format. So here is like I'll try to use this content, and then it's all transformed into CSV document. Right. Okay. It doesn't have to be just a transformation. Of course, it doesn't have to be transformation from SQL Server to some CSV file in blob storage. What we also used this for is to load data from different API endpoints, CRM systems, where usually it's better to use just JSON because the original structure is some hierarchy. So it's better to keep it that way and in the original format also when we are storing that into Azure Blob Storage. Now let's try the demo. So we are already in Azure Data Factory. And I won't get into much details, just to show you around a little bit. We begin by creating the pipeline, which is the main element here. And I was talking about the copy activity, where we would move the data from one source to another sink. I have already prepared the data set, so I don't need to configure everything here. The data set is, let's say, a view on top of linked service. So, and the linked service defined a specific connection, for example, in this case, to a database. So we'll be loading data from the database, but we won't be loading the original table. So I'm using the table access, which I haven't really specified which table it should be, but we'll switch it to query and we will customize the way how we're going to load the data from the database. For that, I have a prepared query. Just copy paste there. I did it wrong. I need to copy paste into the dynamic. So here I'll be using some parameters. I already prepared them here. So I'll be parameterizing this query by year and month. And I see that I have some error here. So it's invalid, telling me that the year is not defined because I haven't really defined these parameters just yet. I'll do it in a second. So this entire pipeline needs to have some parameters. So I just define year and month. And all of this is good. You can actually check and preview the data, which is already loaded and I aggregated. And now we just need to set up the sink. So I'll be using, again, prepared data set for storing the data into the blob storage. You can check how this is defined. So let's first have a look at the connection and the linked service, where I'm connecting to some storage account using storage account key. And here I'm using the parameters again because I want to have nice hierarchical structure of files in the blob storage. So I'm parameterizing the path to the file here as well. What I need to do for the datasets to work properly, I need to specify and pass in the parameters. So I'll just click the parameters month, which is loaded now. And same I will do with the year. And that's pretty much it. Now, like everything is configured for this single pipeline to run, and I can actually try it for my own. We can check that in my blob storage here. I have the aggregations container, which is currently empty. I can, without actually publishing this pipeline just yet, I can use the debug function to just try to run it. Let's see what the results will be. And just see that the pipeline run here. It's queued, so we'll wait a little bit. And it already succeeded. So we won't even see the progress, but we loaded the data from the SQL database to blob storage. And we can check it here as well. It's quite small file, so we can also see that how the CSV file looks like from the portal. Now, I was also talking about how we can run this across multiple months. So I will just briefly suggest how this can be put together. In general, we have the lookup. So what I usually do is, again, I connect to some database that I can run a query against, and I can, for example, generate calendar list of month and year. I'll just select one for now. So that would get me just a single row with one value. And then we will use for each, into which we can pass the result of the lookup, and we would hide this, or put this activity inside the for each. When I would fix all these parameters and how they are passed through, that would work quite nicely. For example, we could aggregate the whole year easily through this and reuse just the same copy activity with different scenarios. All right, so that was the first demo and like first problem that we were looking at. And like, of course, you need to think about what data do you really need in your visuals. You don't need detailed transactional level of your data if you are not really looking at it that way, or if you don't like drill through the visuals and you don't need to drill through visuals to see individual transactions. It's, of course, like you can always like purchase Power BI Premium, but there might be some cheaper solution. So this is what we tried to do here. And what we used was Azure Data Factory for the data transfer and blob storage to aggregate the data. Later, we'll also look at how we can load the data from, for example, blob storage into Power BI Dataflow to make it easier for everyone to access it. And that's when I'm getting to the next problem. Let's check if we have some questions that I can reply, or just give you a little bit break now. All right, nothing so far. So let's move towards the next problem. And that's not really a problem, that's a feature, right? Or not a bug, it's a feature of Power BI. It's a self-service tool. So everyone can build their own reports and everyone wants to. So how can we allow them? When we started building the Power BI reports, it was before my time actually. We had just single developer who was working on the reports and a couple of consumers on the company side with from leadership or with some shared account from the rest of the company. And it started like getting more complicated, but it was still just managed by one team. And the cooperation, like, yeah, they could get around quite easily using clouds to access their Power BI reports and making changes. They were sitting around the same desk, so they could really discuss everything. Later, as we grew, we started to have more complex structure, and suddenly we had these new workspaces that we cooperated through. So we can see it as a finance workspace, sales workspace, and product workspace. And each of these teams, each of these developers, they were working with their own database that they had access to. But what we had to solve is how can we allow cross-department, cross-team access to their databases. And the thing is, for example, with finance database, it's just finance who can really operate on top of that. We can't get access there. And the same way, we want to give access to our operational product database to everyone. So how are we going to solve this? And in an easy way that every team our department can handle that on their own. We were lucky that around that time the Dataflows became became a thing. So this was our first solution to this. And suddenly, like, every department was able to publish their own data flows, and they could control what data they can share with everyone else. And on the side of the consumers, we just use the viewer roles to access the data flows. And what I really liked about it is that everyone already knew Power Query, so it was really easy for them to use it, to administrate it, and to add new items to their data flows. Of course, there are some limitations. The data flows are at their best with premium licensing. We still run it with pro license, so we can't really combine the data flows or the entities together. We can't reference different data flows into another one, and we don't have incremental refresh. Not everyone is working with databases, and they are still like building reports. And if I want to be able to replicate some of the reports that are built on top of Excel, for example, Excel sheets, there needs to be a better way than just to share these files somewhere. And again, the data flow will help here. So what we have learned and what we recommend to the teams is to use Excel sheets in Microsoft Office Online, or put it into OneDrive and then access it and build the data flows on top of these files. With all these Excel files that are present in the OneDrive, you get these direct links that you can use to access them, and it's not public access to these files, but you can use you use your Microsoft account access to authorize and authenticate against the server. And the same way you can use this to load these Excel sheets to your through Power Query, either to your Power BI desktop report or to your data flow, and again make it available for everyone else in the company. The way how to get the links, it can be a little bit tricky to find it. You can, for example, use the desktop app where if the file is already saved into OneDrive, you can use copy path to get that link. And then you pretty much like follow the same flow like when you would load any other resource from the website. When you're, for example, loading tables from web pages. So you use the web contents and just put in the URL, and then you can just load the data. Actually, there is an article that follows this path that I wrote earlier to cover this, also documented for my colleagues. And let's have a look now at how easy it is to build the data flows with your Excel Online files. So I already start here, like in my workspace that I have prepared for this demo. And what we'll be loading is just really just this sample data set into the data flows. So this is actually like offline file, but I have the same copy of this in my OneDrive. So let's have a look at this. First, it's what I usually do is to sort of like prototype the loading in the Power BI desktop, because it gives you more flexibility in debugging, and also the error reporting is like actually works better than with just the data flows. So usually I would just start with creating new resource here. Paste my code. The link that you get from Excel Online is actually this plus query parameter web equals 1. So what is the difference? Like if you use this link, you get to the Excel Online. And if I remove that link, it downloads the original file. So this is the same. This is the way we're going to use when we are reloading the file into our report. So what it actually do? I first define the variable or the constant so that it contains the path. It was just more in a way that I could visualize it better into slide, into presentation. And then we use the web content to load the Excel, and there you would be presented with the list of data in that Excel sheet. We pick just the single table, and of course, like it loads everything, and it considers also our header as a regular row. So we tell it, okay, let's promote these headers into column names, and at the end we just change the type, and that's it. Now we can just know that it works, so we can take this query and put it into our newly created data flow. So within Power BI service, I would just start creating a new data flow in my workspace. You have several options how you can proceed. We'll go with adding new entities, because that's what we are going to do. And again, with blank query, just paste it. And now, like previously when I was showing this in Power BI desktop, it already contained my credentials. Here I need to configure the credentials. So the way I'm going to use is my organizational account, Microsoft account, where I'm already signed in. So I'll keep it this way, so I don't need to log in again. And it will use my company credentials to access the file. Just rename the entity, payments, and save and close. The system will check that everything is valid, and we are good to go to save our first data flow. We can refresh it, or we don't need to now. And Now, when I would make any changes, or anyone else would actually make any changes to the shared online Excel sheet, when this data flow refreshes, it would pull the data automatically. So, you can keep the, I would say, like ways how we can cooperate around some Excel sheets, or you can have, if you want to, for example, set up some Microsoft Flow or Microsoft Automate that would use data from some form and store it in your Excel sheet, and then you can just pull it through using Power BI data flows and give access to everyone else to build the reports on top of this. So yeah, we use Power BI data flows, and for us it's mainly to unify the access to the different data sources, so we can share whenever someone is managing some CRM system, they can also write Power Query that would load the data through the API, and there you can either you can either load everything on the Power BI data flows refresh from that API, or you can configure some data flows you can configure some pipeline in Data Factory to again use the Azure storage and pre-aggregate the data. And you can also manage who has access where. So what we do is that we have these separate workspaces just for these shared data flows, where the admins or the developers control what's in the data flows, and everyone else or other developers get viewer access so that they can load data from there. And yeah, it's something that everyone can do. If they are already building the Power BI reports and they have some experience with Power Query, it's easy for them to just reapply what they've learned and control the data in a Power BI service. Of course, later we also had to solve how can we share the data that we have across company, but at the SQL level, so that we don't need to load everything into our reports and do the joins there, but so that we can join different data sets from different departments already at SQL level. And this is just a quick look into what we did there. So it's sort of distributed way, or you can think about it probably in a data mart solution, where every department has their own database, and now we started using these schemas to control control the access. So, for example, in a database DB1, apart from the standard schema that they have and they use for their own data, we would have also some read-only schema and some read-write schema. Read-only schema would be to show or propagate or publish a shareable data set from the DB1 to public. And why would we need some read-write schema? Well, sometimes, again, the departments, they don't have, for example, the data engineering power or skills to maintain some loads on their own. So for me, it's, for example, easier to, for example, this would be example of the finance database. I would set up a schema where I can have access to only, and then I would set up Azure Data Factory pipeline that would load data from my database to their database. This all works quite well because we are in Azure and we are using Azure SQL database and we have Active Directory. And the great thing about this is that you can set up your permissions and access control using this Azure Active Directory. What you need to start with is to configure the Active Directory admin in Azure portal to your Azure SQL Server. And then you can give access to either user or a security group in your Azure Active Directory. And then, for example, I will specify the read-write schema that would use the author, this user to again give it the authorization. This is just a really like simple example. In not like normally, I wouldn't use just single user, or either you would create a group and in the SQL, and I would assign the user to that group, or we can use the whole security group from Azure Active Directory to create the user around and work with it. And what's great about it is that whenever we have a new user being added to this Azure Active Directory group, they automatically get access to these resources as well. So just to continue to finalize the configuration of the read-write schema, we would give the user also the alter permissions and the ability to create tables and create views, so that this user can load data into this schema. And in case of the read-only one, it's a little bit simpler in this case. So why is this like slightly different? Suddenly we needed to have this cooperation already at the SQL level. And it was great that we could use this Azure Active Directory and database schema to control the access and like distribute also the administration and the way how we are collaborating over the data. And just a brief look into what we are dealing with right now. And that's when we are like building reporting around slightly bigger data, where we use Azure Application Insights to track events and what's happening in our products. And that's on top of Azure Monitor. And we combine with Azure Functions and Azure Storage to get the insights that we need. Again, we try to keep the cost so this low. So this is the way which we are trying to do it. To give some context, right now we are tracking around 1 million events per hour. This is just from the backend. We want to add also the front end tracking into this as well, and also that like later probably like enable more events being actually tracked. How the flow or how the infrastructure looks like. We start with the Azure Monitor, and there we can use the continuous export, where we can store the logged events into blob storage automatically. And then we have these Azure functions that are orchestrated by the Data Factory, and they transform and filter and clean the logs. And for every hour, there is like 120 files being generated. So then we combine these cleaned and resulted files into a single file representing the specific hour. And then we used, again, the Power BI Dataflows to load these blob storage files into Power BI service and give access to other data analysts. So what's our data processing pipeline consists of? We used Azure Monitor and blob storage to keep the data, and Azure Functions, where we use Python to process and clean the data generated by the Azure Monitor. And around this all is Data Factory, that where we have a pipeline that we can run against a single hour and process everything, and or we can specify history, define the times from start and end date, where we want to recalculate the data from historical if we decide that we need some new insights. All right, so we went through all the problems and the challenges, or actually just a fraction of them, but what I managed to put into this presentation. What we've seen is the way how you can, like different ways how you can aggregate the data for your reports. Depends on your data sources or the current like challenges that you might have. How can we control the data with the access to the data through Power BI Dataflows or Azure Active Directory and Azure SQL database? And just briefly, something that we are working on right now is how to process the data from Azure Monitor, and ideally, hopefully, we'll keep the cost low that way. This what follows. I would love to like take these individual topics and break it down into individual blog posts, so you can actually read it with more technical details. So for that, if you are interested in it, check our blog, developers.mews.com, or our Twitter account, MewsDevs. And I'll be also happy to keep on the discussion and hear from you what you think about it, whether you have some suggestions or how you dealt with similar problems. And so let's follow up after this talk, or you can ping me at the Slack of CheckPass or at my Twitter at Vojta Kopal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vojta, for your talk. We will keep the chat open for a few more minutes, and we can have a few discussions. And please put your questions into the chat. We will try to reply on them. So actually, I wanted to kick it off. So I prepared my first question. And my question would be, how many Power BI users do you actually have at Mews that are using basically these reports and data? And
so we have 4 teams right now. And so we have a team in finance where we have 3 data analysts building reports. We have product data analysts. Currently, it's 4 of us. We have in London, there are commercial data analysts, 2 of them, and the research team. So overall, I would say like 10 people right now, developers, and a few more like interested colleagues who wants to build their own reports or have access to the data. Usually product managers, they want to build their own reports, or someone from operations as well. So this is like combination of that. How can we manage some consistency in how they are working with the data and where they are loading it from?
Maybe I will continue with what additional question, as we didn't get any yet on the chat. The other question would be, I actually forgot about it. Yeah, one thing, everybody who is there, just cheers. If you are having a beer, if not, grab one.
Just water.
Just water. Actually, I forgot the question. Too much beer. Drink less beer, ask questions, please. I remember now. Do you have any as well external users that are using the Power BI reports outside of Mews?
Yes, we actually. So there are 2 parts of this I would answer. First one is that recently, we started looking into how can we use Azure Power BI embedded capacity to promote some of our reports. So we actually are working on one report right now that we want to publish publicly through that. And then we also have I would use this capacity also like to distribute the reports for the rest of the company who they don't have the pro license. So that would also work. And the second part for this is that we started building our own Power BI integration for our customers into the product. So we use Power BI Embedded to embed the reports for hotels and hostels and give them like this nice visualization of their performance, where they can compare the chains, their own properties within one chain. So usually you have chain with, for example, 10 properties, and they want to see how they are performing. So this is something that we are working on. We already are testing this with selected clients and trying to bring in more features and a little bit like get around the limitations of the Power BI embedded, the feels and looks of it, and how can we make it more consistent with overall UI and UX of our product.
Yep, thank you very much. Actually, we have now one question here. Have you evaluated any other solutions, or did you decide for Power BI because of how it is easily integrated with Azure SQL and other Microsoft products?
We used to have other BI tools, but I only know it from stories, because that was before I joined. And yeah, like I think like what we liked about the Power BI at the beginning was like that it's actually quite easy to start with, right? Like this Power BI desktop, it's at least for me, like it looked like really like natural. Like you can just jump in, like creating your own reports. Everyone can do that. I was actually like looking at different solutions last year. I wanted to look at Looker actually, but they're like they have like what I understood from also like the demoing and presentation is that it works quite well if you have like single data warehouse or single computation engine or single SQL server, or if you have all data already unified. What's really powerful, I think, about Power BI is that you can quite easily combine various data sources together, Excel sheets with databases, and everyone can like do that. And like it provides you also like with this computation engine, like the analysis services behind the Power BI services. So you don't really need to think about much like what you are loading into in there, like when at the beginning.
Yep, thanks. There is another question. Do you somehow monitor how often your users use Power BI service? How they actually use it?
We have the 365 audit log enabled, and I'm loading the data from there to see how different reports are being used by the users, whether we have any stale reports that are not being used anymore, or then we can try to figure out why. This is something that I believe still requires a bit of manual work, unfortunately, or I haven't really figured out whether this is already prepared for like full automation. I think the main limit there was that you can't use service principal access to the REST API of Power BI service. At least it did not work at the time when I tried. So you need to use like PowerShell to load the data and then continue from there, like to like load the data to your reports. And I have actually like my Power BI report, like where I look at what's being used and whatnot.
Yep, thanks. Some other question. Can give it 1 or 2 minutes.
You need to wait for the stream to catch up.
Maybe one question from my side. Are you guys using as well some integration with as Power BI is part of the Power Platform? If you are using as well some of these features?
We are. I wonder. I have been like playing around with this. I don't think like the thing is, and that's probably won't sound that good right now, but we already started like a couple of years ago. We built a lot of automation around Zapier, and we have like a lot of that integrated into our like communication channels and everything. But we are looking at since like we are moving more and more into the Microsoft platform, and also the way how we manage like the office the company structure and everything. It's like the identity management, everything is in like Microsoft and Azure Active Directory. So it feels like quite natural to move ahead with other services like Teams and Microsoft Automate. And what I tried to do with this was like building these Power Apps into reports, and for this use case, I've seen it in Vienna last year, where they were like presenting how you can like do this like case study simulations or parameters like testing your hypothesis and storing the what if values through Power App into some SQL database or somewhere, and then load it back. So people or the users can try to parameterize like some like cost analysis, and then click the Power App button to store the configuration and then load it back, which was quite cool, and I really liked it. And I just end up building some prototype, and haven't moved ahead with like bringing it into any like production ready thing.
Yep. And maybe my last question, and then maybe we can close it, is you were mentioning that you were kind of building the Power through these data flows. You were kind of building the data warehouse within your company. And have you actually thought when it would be good to have the data warehouse, or do you see that this really can kind of not supply, but kind of work instead of the like the database data warehouse?
Yeah, we are definitely like thinking about and preparing ourselves for the modern data warehouse solution. I've spent went through the track that was in the Insights tour in Prague about data and data warehousing, and I love what Microsoft did with the Azure Synapse. It's about like costs, right? Like I definitely see the value, and it will require a lot of internal like operations and preparations like between departments, having like different like sort of almost like contracts between individual departments on how are we going to provide the data between each other into the warehouse. And there will be like a lot of steps that we need to do, and then also like the costs will probably like jump quite high. So as long as we can maintain, I will like, yeah, it's probably like the way that we are planning it. We already had some roadmap for bringing in the data warehouse, and now it's that these solutions that we have right now. This is for us for this moment, so that we can make it work. Because the way I see it is that like bringing the data warehouse project into a company will take us like several months and preparation. So we need to keep both like solutions for now, and we'll get there. And hopefully, I want to end up with a proper like data warehouse solution, if that will be like beneficial for the company. And you're muted now.
Sorry. Before we move to, there is one new question, but I wanted to have a follow-up. Do you see any, because you are talking always like keeping the cost on minimum, which is normal, but do you see any advantage or any kind of pitfall that you kind of are maybe seeing in the future? Why would you, like move to the data warehouse if you can kind of point out to our watchers?
So you mean like pitfalls? Why
to move to data
there?
warehouse? No, I mean pitfall. Why would you move to the data warehouse? What would be the reason?
For us, it's about consistency and of the data and keeping the interpretations of the data like across company and understanding what we are really looking at. We have like different departments. They have their own CRM systems. We have our operational database, and in all these systems or all these solutions, there is some representation of what we call client or enterprise or hotel, hostel, and with various different variables, various different properties, and it keeps some like extra effort to keep us everyone in sync in terms of what we are talking about, what's actually the value of a certain customer, where are you getting this data from. Depending on how skillful the department or team is, they can have there already some sales engineer or someone who can like write some automated synchronization between the databases. So they are loading the data from the various sources to their CRM system. Then we have these like redundancies and duplication of data across company. So, which is probably like fine when you look at the data just within the single department and you have everything that you need in the department. But when we try to look at the like company-wide data and building like company-wide reporting, it can be quite challenging. So that's why I think like this would be like good way, like good solution, like bringing in the data warehouse for this, so that we have this consolidated reporting and consolidated data model over the data that we have.
Yep, cool. We have now two new questions. How do you handle synchronizing databases migrations or DB migrations with the dev team?
Right now, we have like this usually consider like we have development and demo and production environment in for our production and for the dev team. And what we have also in our data factories, we and also like in Dataflows and everywhere we have all like three environments there. So we are sort of like replicating the reports on top of these. So the way how this work, like more like if like honestly, is that usually something gets through without like anyone like noticing us, and it breaks the develop pipeline. And that's like the notification that we need to do something about it and like fix it. And we have usually a couple of days because like when the develop is being deployed, it's before it actually gets to any releases, and like it's still a couple of days or a week before it gets to production. So this is when we are like, this is the last moment when we are notified that something's happening. Other than that, it's based on like communication within the team that like the product teams are usually informing us, and what we like the way how we migrate things. We are like doing on the database. We are doing these non-breaking changes. So the like ideal scenario is that we are introducing some change to the database. So it's usually some column will be added or some column needs to be renamed. So there will be first like non-breaking change, like introducing new column. Then will be another change introducing migration on the database from one column to another column. That's going on for a while. And when this is ready, this is usually the window for us to update our reporting, update our pipelines, where we know that both of these columns are present and can be used at the same time. We can switch the reports, and then the dev team will introduce new non-breaking change when everything is already migrated, and remove the old column.
Yep, thanks. And one question: have you considered to use Power BI aggregations, composite models in your project?
Yes, I was actually I'll admit I failed to make it work in some scenarios that I was looking at. I really like the idea to bring it in, and I know about it, and I plan to use it to fix or make some of the reports scalable and combine the loaded data with the direct query and use the aggregated model. When I was debugging it through Dex Studio and trying to, Microsoft SQL Management Studio, I sort of failed to see all the measures and queries I had to hit the aggregated table when I expected to do so. So I sort of gave up at the time, and I'll need to get back to it again.
Okay. I would say if we don't get any question in a few minutes. Okay, Vojta, then I think we will not get any more questions. I thank you very much for presenting, and as well, thank you very much all of you guys for watching this channel. Grab a beer, have a toast, and enjoy the evening, and we see us next time.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.